Everybody. So just the thought for today. I've been listening to a lot of Beck lately. Big fan of Beck. Have been for God, almost his entire career. And I just got to thinking, you really just don't see too many people like him anymore. And yet, at the same time, I'm listening to a lot of Beck. I'm reading a lot about the history of music in America and the history of rock and roll and things like that. And you look back and in the beginning of the recording industry, there were a lot of blues guys that was recorded. Hank Williams was recorded on the countryside, but as far as mainstream just commercial success, it was Bing Crosby, Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, guys like that. Nat King Cole was big back in the day. And then of course the 50s, Elvis, the first rock star, the explosion of the rock star. And then the 60s got into, folk and rock kind of blending. Guys like Bob Dylan, Paul Simon, Neil Young came onto the scene, not as a solo artist so much, but it was that kind of a thing. Stevie Wonder. And then the 70s was just, you were spoiled for choice in the 70s with solo artists. You had not just the guys I'd mentioned still going strong, but James Taylor, Gordon Lightfoot, in England, Elton John, David Bowie, Cat Stevens, and then the guys with the backing bands, Bruce Springsteen, Tom Petty, Bob Seger. They were all around in the 70s. Jim Croce. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on of solo male, or in the case of Bob Seger, Bruce Springsteen, Tom Petty, solo guys with backing bands. But it was just a golden age of single male singers. And then in the 80s, you started to see the scale starting to tip more towards women, pop stars, really. And that trend continues to this day. But Madonna just broke the rule book. She was like the first mega star on the woman's side that I can remember. And you started to see, like, the 80s were pretty much Michael Jackson and Prince. You didn't really have too many super popular male artists in the 80s. And then you go into the 90s, Mariah Carey came on the scene and sold a bajillion records, continuing that trend. And on the man side, it was really hip hop artists dominated the 90s, from what I remember. Snoop Dogg, Dr. Dre, Tupac, Biggie, um, Eminem a little bit later, but it was really hip hop that dominated that decade. There were a lot of good bands, a lot of one hit wonder bands in the 90s, but as far as solo artists go, like, that was pretty much it. The one guy who would make the exception was Beck, and his career started in the mid 90s, and he was a solo artist, and it wasn't hip hop and it wasn't pop. It was, I always love artists that you can't really put in a box anywhere, and Beck is very much that kind of an artist. He just doesn't fit neatly into anything. So, if you ever see what kind of music he plays, like on Wikipedia or any kind of, on Spotify, any article written about him, they'll name at least 10 genres of what he did. His first album, uh, honestly, was the first time I heard dubstep. To my ear, it seemed like he's the godfather of dubstep. Um, but he was like the one guy, not pop, not country, not hip hop, but making good music. And then, in the 2000s, you had, Justin Bieber, and then later Ed Sheeran, but it was dominated by female solo artists: Pink, Katy Perry, Taylor Swift, Rihanna, uh, Nicki Minaj. Um, the list there goes: Christina Aguilera. The list there, Carrie Underwood. My God, the list there just goes on and on and on. Adele, Megan Trainor, and that's really where we are now. It's like pop is queen, is more appropriate than saying pop is king. And the solo artists that I can name now on the men's side are, Iron and Wine. Sam Beam, who goes by Iron and Wine. I did a video about that. Maybe that's the thing, is that there's so many guy solo artists who are, um, operating under what seems sounds like a band name that we just don't see them anymore. And maybe that's it. But Beck has stayed pretty consistently good for like 30 years. And in fact, I kind of printed out his discography, um, so we can take a look at that. Um, so I highlighted what I think are like the mainstream songs that he did. This is the one that sounded like dubstep to me. Early beginnings, sales of about 50,000 units. Mellow Gold, Loser was the one that put him on the map. I think everybody of a certain age remembers Loser. And that was the one that put him on the map. You can see he had some commercial success. One Foot in the Grave, really nothing there. Odelay was big. That was his best selling one, according to Google Gemini, which is where I get most of my data. Devil's Haircut, Where It's At. Those are two fairly well known songs. Um, I love these albums. Like the thing about Beck is like it's also not only is he a throwback artist, his albums are throwbacks. It's very much a theme album. Like with few exceptions, you can't really take a song off of this album and put it on this album. Like these two blend together a little bit, The Information and Modern Guilt. But these early albums are very distinct, one from the other. This one has a much different sound and feel than this one. Mutation sounds nothing like Sea Change, and then Guero comes in and sounds nothing like Sea Change, just breaks all the rules. E-Pro, I think everybody knows. Girl is great tune. That had some mainstream success, a little bit of radio airplay. The Information, I mean, it's another one. You put it on, you hit play. You don't need to mess with it. It's going to be just consistent, good sound for about an hour. Same with Modern Guilt, Morning Phase. Country Down's a great song. I love Country Down. And then Colors, No Distraction came out of nowhere, just rocked my socks off. Love that one. And then, Hyperspace. So it looks like he's waning in popularity. Commercially, it's pretty clear that he peaks here. In my mind, he peaks here with Sea Change and Wero. These are two fantastic albums, and they sound nothing like each other, but just back to back supernova albums. And then, all of these are so good. So I was happy to, I read up on him a little bit, and I was happy to see that he actually has won 8 Grammys. And Morning Phase in 2014 won Album of the Year. So it won a Grammy for Album of the Year. So he has had a lot of critical acclaim and a good bit of commercial success. Really interesting life. If you read about his life, it's the typical musician's life. I also did a video about that one, and he checks all those boxes. Multiple relationships, multiple labels. Really interesting dude. He has I think, a reputation of being a Scientologist, and that isn't his background, although he identifies as Jewish. Was married to Giovanni Ribisi's twin sister, Marissa. That's a fun fact about him. If you know Giovanni Ribisi from, Avatar, or he's been in a lot of stuff. He narrated Virgin Suicides, which is one of my favorite movies. Yeah, really interesting dude. And he still looks like he's 28 years old. It was the last concert I saw before Rush. I did a video about that as well. But he's great in concert. He had the little table going with the puppets, and all the puppets are mimicking what everybody on the stage is doing. And then they did the clap hands thing with the cups and plates and bowls and spoons and forks sitting at the table, just making music / noise with all that. Just really cool guy. I'm a fan. But in the last 30 years, male artists, I can't name another one, at least not one who's not a pop star, or who doesn't operate by a band name. I'm probably missing somebody, but to me, Beck is one of the last of a dying breed. Would love to see that trend rebound. Would love to see another 70s where you had all these different artists making great music. But I just don't know that we will. I don't know. It's definitely the age of pop, and it's definitely the age of the female pop singer. No hate on that, for sure. The opinion of a 15-year-old girl is to me equally as important as the opinion of a guy who's been writing for Rolling Stone for 50 years. You know, a person's a person, and an opinion, they're all equal to me. And I can't argue with the success of these pop artists. You know, Taylor Swift sells a bajillion albums all the time, and it's not easy to do. But yeah, for sure, would love to see more like Beck. So that was my thought for the day. Love to hear what you have to say in the comments. So send me a note and we'll figure it out. Y'all take care.